Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all, wherever you are in our wide world. Welcome to another NetHope webinar. My name is Seth Otto. I'm the Digital Communications Manager here at NetHope and producer of the NetHope webinar series. And we are delighted to be joined today by experts from NetHope, NetHope member Mercy Corps, and a founding member of NetHope's Center for the Digital Nonprofit Okta for Good, who will also be joining the NetHope community as a visionary sponsor of the 2024 NetHope Global Summit this October. Today, we'll be discussing findings from new research that reveal key considerations and challenges for evaluating technology and projecting its impact on nonprofits' priorities, such as mission, productivity, cost savings, and security. We'll also explore how to better communicate the value of technology and investments to nonprofit boards of directors. Let's go over a bit of housekeeping before we get started. First off, let's make this webinar interactive. Please let us know what comes up for you. Please post your comments and questions in the chat window, and the presenters will address them during our discussion period. In the hours following today's webinar, please pay attention to your email. We will be sending you a follow-up that includes links to the webinar recording, the slides, and any other resources that we share today during the presentation and discussion. And we value your feedback. Your opinion matters to us, and we use your responses to our survey to improve this webinar series for you and our broader NetHope community. And it also provides our presenters with an opportunity to connect with you if you want them to. So there will be links to the webinar survey popping up in your new browser tab after the webinar today. All right, with all that out of our way, I'd like to welcome our expert speakers. Sarah Sparker Patel is Director of Corporate Partnerships at Mercy Corps, and our very own Daniela Weber, who is the Deputy Director of NetHope's Center for the Digital Nonprofit. And we are thrilled to be joined by experts from Okta for Good. Remy Champion is a Senior Manager, and Taylor Whitfield, Manager at Okta for Good. And I will now hand things over to Remy at Okta for Good to get things started. Remy, over to you. I will switch over to your slide deck here.
Perfect. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Seth. Thank you, NetHope, for hosting us today. We are really happy to be here. Very excited to chat with you all today about a topic that we hear pretty often from nonprofit tech leaders as a challenge. And so that's just what Seth said, getting board approval for new technology solutions. So what we've done and what we're going to share in this webinar is we put together a framework that is going to help unlock board understanding for these new technology purchases. This framework is based off of years of conversations that Okta has had with both our close nonprofit customers, as well as customers in the for-profit sectors, as well as consultants, industry leaders, industry analysts, and even board members themselves. So I think there's many years of expertise that have gone into this framework. And we are also very excited to have Daniela from NetHope, who will also be sharing some information towards the end on her research on this topic. And then we'll also be hearing from Sarah at Mercy Corps, one of our longtime customers. So looking forward to really getting all of this information over to you all. As Seth mentioned, we really want this webinar to be, I think, really interactive. I think this is a great opportunity for you all to learn from each other in terms of what has worked and what hasn't in your experience in getting board approval. So yeah, stay active in the chat. Give us your questions, give us your feedback on what's worked, what hasn't. All right, over to the next slide. So to formally introduce myself, I'm Remy Champion. I lead the Tech for Good team at Okta. And for those of you not familiar with Okta, Okta is an identity management company that provides cybersecurity and identity solutions, both for your internal stakeholders and internal infrastructure, as well as your external stakeholders. So at many nonprofits, that's going to look like your donors, your volunteers, and the communities that you're serving. So Tech for Good is just one part of Okta for Good. Okta for Good is Okta's corporate social responsibility team. But here on the Tech for Good team, we're really focused on connecting and serving the nonprofit sector with accessible products, services, and expertise from Okta. And over to you, Taylor.
Hi, I'm Taylor. I'm also on Okta's Tech for Good team. And part of my role is to increase awareness about cybersecurity and how social good organizations are using technology to further their missions. I actually started my career in the nonprofit realm, volunteering and working for nonprofits, including 7 years at Kiva, leading community engagement. So I'm very familiar with the challenges around technology in nonprofits. Next slide. So a little context for why we're hosting this webinar. As a tech company at Okta for Good, we see that implementing enterprise software is a challenge for any organization, but especially for nonprofits with unpredictable funding and less IT resources. So today we'll offer some perspectives from Okta for Good customers and NetHome members and ideas for demonstrating the value of technology investments to your boards or leadership teams. And our goal is really to shift the conversation from just about tech purchases that are needed to essential business investments with a clear ROI. Next slide.
Okay, so Taylor's going to be presenting this 5-step framework for quantifying the value of technology. Then Daniela will hop in with some of her research that really, I think, talks about why this type of framework is so crucial specifically for digital transformation. And then Sarah from Mercy Corps is going to jump in with some of Mercy Corps' best practices on getting board approval. So the 5 key vectors that are part of this framework are supporting mission impact, enhancing productivity and efficiency, reducing costs, strengthening security and compliance, and accelerating fundraising. And after Taylor provides some more detail on here, again, we want to get your feedback on what resonates with you and what doesn't. We know that getting tech investments can be so difficult often because they are long-term investments, and getting them are so nuanced at each organization, right? It really depends on how your organization operates. So again, that's why it's so important that we learn from each other here. All right, so over to Taylor, and the next slide, she's gonna finally get into this framework with you all.
Great. So to start off a conversation about adding or integrating new software, you're probably all very familiar with the need to demonstrate how it will increase your mission impact. But that isn't always quantifiable. One of our customers and NetHope member, Norwegian Refugee Council, said they focus on showing what the technology will make possible that's not possible today, kind of more generally. And you can do this by providing estimates and goals or more qualitative data and observations. You can also use storytelling with specific examples to demonstrate how the technology correlates to business objectives or solves a certain challenge. For example, you could explain how the new tech initiative will increase capacity or program quality. And if you are able to quantify the impact on those things, obviously numbers will definitely strengthen your case, but you don't always have to. And it might be compelling to also report how digitally mature your organization is or isn't. By digital maturity, I just mean how advanced your org is with technology and data. So Salesforce published a nonprofit trends report in 2022, and they found that digitally mature nonprofits, we're on the next slide. Digitally mature nonprofits that exceeded their technology goals were also 30% more likely to have exceeded their mission and volunteering goals. So there's a direct correlation there. And if your org is not that digitally mature, that's a really helpful statistic to share. But if you are more advanced, then you could always reference learnings from previous software implementations and the impact they made. Next slide. And another key issue to address is the timing, right? Like, why is the technology needed right now? What's going on in your org? Was there a particular event that happened to inspire this need? And creating a sense of urgency can help motivate leaders as long as you're being thoughtful of other priorities on the roadmap. Next slide. And the second point we recommend making is to tell your board exactly how the software improves productivity and efficiency. So how can you manage the increasing complexity of what the technology might make possible with the same or fewer resources? So in the case of identity software, you could show how it gives users secure and easy access to the tools they need and provides self-serve resources. So they're getting what they need faster and are being more productive. And then most solutions today are all about automation. So pointing to that, how that reduces manual processes and predicting what that looks like over time, right? Um, and then how that solution will scale as well. And then if the new technology improves community engagement for your members and donors, or for those you serve, um, that's obviously going to make a difference in how efficient you are in working towards your goals. If the community is engaged, so highlighting how that increases the business impact on the entire org as well. Great. So next, when you're asking for budget for new technology, it helps to calculate the cost savings. And you can try to quantify things like employee hours saved or expenses that will be replaced, like software licensing, for example. And then you can use this formula, spend X dollars to reduce Y number of operational hours, which equates to Z dollars of savings or Z reduction of employee headcount. And if you can quantify this for many years out, would be a really compelling statistic, and yeah, be an impressive number. And for security solutions, there's also the option to possibly save on your cybersecurity insurance policy. Many of them have deductions for when you add security products. So some other, little unlikely ways to save that you might not think of, but just kind of looking where you can. I'll pause here just to let that sink in, and we'll also be sharing this deck, so you'll have all of this handy. Go ahead, Seth. So this is a quote from one of our nonprofit customers at Year Up. And it really hones in on why calculating cost savings is important. So Gary Flowers, the Chief Information Officer at Year Up, says that investments that correlate with cost savings generate returns multiple times over and can actually pay for themselves, solidifying board approval and ongoing support. Um, and then Mercy Corps, who's on the call today, uses an investment memo to show the problem a software is solving, as well as its ROI and benefits in the short and the long term. And Sarah Patel, who's with us today, might be able to provide more detail on that. But yeah, so pointing out other metrics that can be improved, like reduced time for onboarding and offboarding, or to do certain tasks, employee satisfaction scores, any improvements there, and then breach avoidance costs. Those are really big costs. So, for example, last year, IBM published a cost of a breach report, and they found that across industries, the average cost of a data breach was $4.45 million. And it took 11 months on average to contain those breaches. So pointing to the potential costs as well. Um, and if you're not sure how to calculate any of these metrics, you could always ask the software vendor. They might have examples of improved metrics for customers that have very similar organizations, same size, same industry, that they can share with you. Next slide. Great. So the fourth step in our framework is security and compliance. So you're probably all well aware this is a hot topic. Many headlines about nonprofit breaches. Hopefully you haven't experienced too many yourselves. And this is bad news, but it does mean that leadership teams are more concerned about cybersecurity and willing to improve technology as a safeguard. So these are some metrics from Gartner that can help you measure how a new technology will improve cybersecurity or improve recovery if you've already had attacks and breaches. And you can use this as a guide for additional metrics for the technology you're requesting. Not every software will help with each of these, but it could be helpful to review this and see if any of them apply, to give examples of how the metrics relate to specific use cases. For example, to show how a technology helps you meet compliance standards, there's one on here that about access removal time. So showing how the technology reduces access removal time to sensitive materials during when an employee offboards, for example. And then sometimes the biggest risk is doing nothing. So calling out the implication of not making the investment can also be powerful. What would happen if no action was taken, and what would the impact be on your operations, or how would that put your organization at risk? Next slide. Great. Well, we're already to our fifth step. So the last major board interest we want to highlight is how new technology can impact donors and fundraising teams. So an improved user experience, which often happens with new technology, could improve donations and fundraising. For example, in the donation process itself, if there's any friction there, subconsciously people might just give up or not try to enter a password, or if there's any part of the process that's clunky and you're smoothing that out, you'll see improvements there. And some KPIs that you can project to prove this are donor growth rate, donor retention rate, lifetime value, revenue per donor, conversion rate. You could also calculate a dollar value similar to the last formula for increased fundraising income. So showing how if you spend X dollars to improve the usability of external systems, that will equal Z dollars in donations.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Taylor, for getting through that framework. So we think there's one very important additional component that we need to talk about here, and that is managing change. I think to make sure that technology is adopted widely, but also adopted successfully, managing change is going to be key, right? I think the post-purchase stage is sometimes one of the most difficult parts of new technology investments. And we've seen that many nonprofits do actually report implementation challenges. This is often due to personnel resourcing or skill gaps, and maybe none of this is new information to you all. But one of our partners, TechSoup, reported that about 25% of nonprofits have the funds for digital transformation, and then 50% have the personnel resources and skill sets to implement the new technology. So that means 50% don't have the personnel resources and skill sets to implement new technology, right? So I think as you're creating your plan, make sure that you think about what is actually going to be required from your team specifically, right? Think about training, think about additional personnel headcount that's required. If not now, maybe in the future, right? And then I think the other important part of managing change is everyone else in your organization that will be impacted by the new technology. So that could be other staff, it could be maybe volunteer, workflows or onboarding flows that are going to be changed by a new technology investment. So I would encourage you all, as part of your, plan that you're creating to get a tech investment, is make sure you do some sort of like internal listening, right, with other leaders in the organization, with other stakeholders, to learn what's important for them, what you're going to shift on their side, and also how you're going to help them manage the change, right? There should be a plan, I think, for any type of training or addressing any concerns, right, about disrupting current routines. Humans can be, very adverse to change, even if it's the most minute things, and even if in the long run it is very good for us. So keep that in mind. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it over to Daniela. She's going to get into some of NetHope's research on digital nonprofit finance. I think that's going to touch on some of the challenges with getting investments and buy-in across the organization, especially when there's not a clear baseline to measure impact from.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Remy. So I'm Daniela Weber. Hello from Germany. I'm the Deputy Director of NetHope's Center for the Digital Nonprofit. We conduct research and support nonprofits in their digital transformation. Next slide, please, Seth. As part of that work, quite a while ago, we've developed the DNA, Digital Non-Profitability Assessment, and that defines a number of categories that help measure the maturity of organizations or the readiness of organizations when it comes to digital transformation. One of these is investment, and last year we started deep diving a little bit into that one because we started hearing from a lot of our members and other NGOs that they were struggling with finding the financial support for their digital investments. So we created the Digital Nonprofit Finance, which again defines categories along which we can measure the maturity around finance processes and investment decisions, and we can help identify gaps in here. And then with that, we conducted interviews, we conducted a survey, and we talked to IT and finance leaders about these different categories and what challenges they had. And if you go to the next slide, please, Seth, I can talk a bit about what the findings from the initial interviews were. And that was really all about, well, on the one side, there is a funding squeeze, there is diminishing unrestricted funding, which is where many of these large IT and digital investments usually get funded from, and many looking at ways of finding a way of charging that cost out across the organization, for example, as one remedy of that. The other was really that CIOs were struggling to formulate business cases for the investment they wanted to make. So expressing the benefits and the value of the investments is a challenge, and that's why those 5 categories that Taylor presented are so important, because those really help identify what can those specific areas of value and of benefit be that would back up an investment. And the other observation was also there is not a lot of tracking of these benefits after the implementation, which is a real shame, because those are then really good stories to tell for the next conversation you're going to have with the board, to actually be able to show that the investment indeed has created a value. Next one, please, Seth. So looking at overall where organizations measure up on the digital nonprofits finance, you can see it's overall medium maturity levels. It's not a lot of difference between the different categories, but clearly where we saw the lowest scores in terms of maturity was around analyzing the financial aspects. So costs and benefits and impact achieved. Again, that goes back to being able to tell the story of what has been done, and also having this list from the different departments that IT supports on what is actually needed in terms of digital investment, and make sure that the work plan and what IT is doing is actually informed by that. And that's to your point, Remy, as well. Talk to the people in your organization, find out what they need in terms of digital solutions. And we also saw an interesting discrepancy where within organizations there was a disalignment on whether the information communication technology and digital investment projects were actually linked to the organizational strategy. Indeed, that is a case for making sure to be close to that strategy and link the investment to that strategy, because the strategy is what the board supports, and it's very good and very valuable to be able to link to that. Next one, please, Seth. An interesting example also was the research we've done recently on enterprise resource planning. So that's your finance, HR, supply chain solutions that you use very often across your organization or a big part of your organization. We did some research there, and one of the questions was around the business case. So why did you do that investment? And those are some of the larger investments that organizations will be doing. And if you look at the first 3 points here, it was around replacing manual processes or spreadsheets. It was about improving business processes and transparency and accountability. Again, it links back very well to these categories we saw earlier. It's about being more efficient. It's about being compliant and donor reporting and all these things. So those were the drivers for these projects. And if we go to the next slide, Seth, please. On the business improvement, business process improvement. So what organizations told us was that more than half of them did think they had improved business processes, but why not more? One links back to something you said earlier as well, Remy, which is about change. Incredibly important to do the change management, to embed those kinds of solutions properly in your organization, because only then will you get the value out of the use, particularly if we're talking processes and efficiency. But also here again, there was a struggle to express the benefits and the improvements in numbers. So while many organizations said, yes, our business processes have improved, they're more efficient, they were not able to put a number to that and saying, okay, we've saved X hours on the process, for example. And I think this is where organizations can help themselves more by looking at, and can just be one example, process, creating and sending a purchase order, for example, and really deep dive into, with our old systems, with our manual processes, with our Excel sheets, what does it take us end to end to conduct this process, and then looking what a new integrated business system could do to change that. And it will change that. And I think those are the very tangible examples that will help with the board, with the decision makers on budgets to get approval for the investment. Next one, Beth, and that's the last one, hot off the press, cybersecurity budgets. So in our newest State of the Humanitarian Development Cybersecurity, which will be published end of this month or early next month, we've seen some improvement there towards last year in terms of budgets for cybersecurity being a little bit more adequate. But still, it's only 39% of respondents that said they are adequate. So again, there is a big need here to be able to tell that story, to talk about also the risk of doing nothing, particularly when it comes to cybersecurity, and to make sure that boards understand those risks and understand why this is really, really important. And with that, I'm handing to Taylor.
Thanks, Daniela. That was really helpful to have some quantitative evidence of all that we're talking about today, and it goes really nicely with our framework. So just to kind of reiterate the key takeaways as we wrap up the framework. So here's our top recommendations for making a case to your board. So ask the software vendors for examples of customer cost savings. Do your research first and gather all of the information, all of the statistics that you could possibly get, and then estimate the impact on your mission and productivity. So projections, estimates, and goals, and then explain how the new technology strengthens security and reduces risks. To Daniela's point, cybersecurity budgets are smaller than they should be, and it might really help to make a case around this stronger. And then show how a more efficient and enjoyable user experience leads to more donations. It's not just about ease of use internally or externally. That does have a very clear connection to boosting revenue or donations. And then juxtaposing the consequences of not implementing the technology. I think someone asked about that in the chat as well. This is really important to show that other scenario. It's very compelling. And as Remy went over, a clear plan for change management to make sure that it's successfully used. And of course, securing the approval is just the first step. So once you do that and start implementing technology, just making sure that you're keeping your board updated about the technology's impact. This is an easy one to forget. You're already so in it and things are working better, but to remember to report back on that measurable progress, just to continue building trust with the board and any stakeholders involved. So the next time you need an ask, they're really aware of how it went. And you know, as Daniela showed in her research, noting where you started too, so you have that before and after and initial benchmarks, so that you're able to make that comparison and have those metrics of progress. But Mercy Corps might be able to touch more on that in a moment. Over to you, Rami.
Okay, so next slide. We're just wrapping up here. Thanks all for that. So that really wraps up, I think, just our framework presentation portion of this. I just wanted to give you one reminder about who Okta is and what we offer in case you're not familiar with Okta. Right, so we're an identity management company. We have over 18,000 customers across industries and across the world that relies on Okta to securely connect their technologies. So we just shared this presentation about how challenging it is to get tech investments approved. And because of this, as well as other funding challenges that we know you all have to deal with, Okta for Good does offer a variety of benefits and programs for our verified nonprofit customers. So feel free to check out okta.com/nonprofits to check out more of what we offer. We're happy to start a conversation with you all if you're interested. And then now we're gonna chat with Sarah for a little bit. So I'll hand it over to you, Taylor.
Great. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to dig into Mercy Corps' experience on this topic. So maybe you can start by just introducing yourself and telling us what you do for Mercy Corps.
Sure. Thank you, Taylor. Hi, everyone. I am Sarah Sparker Patel, and I am the Director of Corporate Partnerships at Mercy Corps. For those of you who are new to NetHope or new to the INGO space, I just want to give a little plug for what we do at Mercy Corps. So we are an international non-governmental organization. We work in more than 40 countries throughout the world to both address, we provide emergency response in the midst of a crisis or conflict. And then we also work with communities to provide kind of longer term resilience building in the wake of increasing crises that we see, with an eye toward climate and its effects always. So my role at Mercy Corps is corporate partnerships. So I manage relationships with several large US companies, predominantly in the tech space. And with those companies, I build meaningful partnerships to provide value to both parties, but also to create that lasting impact for the local communities where we work. So that's me, and that's Mercy Corps. And I'm so happy to be here to discuss this topic. I think it's incredibly important, and it's time to give it the love that it deserves. So excited to be here and talk about this with you.
Great. So yeah, could you start by just sharing what, if there are any frameworks or best practices that Mercy Corps follows when trying to gain board approval on budget for technology investments, if there are any?
Yeah, so all large investments at Mercy Corps, whether technology or otherwise, go through the board during the annual budgeting process. So for us, our fiscal year is July 1st to June 30th. And so the budgeting process is way before July 1st. And basically, Mercy Corps' technology leaders develop an investment memo that goes to the executive sponsor. So in our case, this is going to be the Chief Financial and Administrative Officer. And this investment memo is a very high-level account of the problem we're solving, the ROI, and the benefits that the technology would bring, both short-term and long-term, and then, of course, the costs associated with it. So I do want to kind of sit on this for just a sec here. So prior to the executive sponsor bringing this memo up to the board, it really is an incredibly rigorous process that our tech leaders go through to leverage this risk register kind of initiative. So basically, it's listing the risks of both making and not making the investment. And I saw Beverly's question earlier, which I love. And you know, I think, Beverly, you were asking about something more quantitative. Qualitatively, I think what you show when you're looking at not making the investment versus making it, it's basically, okay, how big is the list of risks associated with not making the investment versus making it? But quantitatively, I think that's a really interesting question, because maybe it's something like, you know, if we don't, you know, launch this internal AI chatbot, you know, our chances of our data being compromised goes up to this percent. And so if you do this percent times, you know, the cost, this is what it would end up being. I don't know, something like that. But anyway, so back to our process, our framework. So then the executive sponsor, which is the Chief Financial and Administrative Officer, reviews the request, the memo, determines available funding, obviously, to support the request, and then, you know, approves or rejects it based on fit for purpose and financial feasibility. And then it moves to the board's finance committee. So, you know, in the board, there are different committees. So it first goes to the board's finance committee. Then the finance committee reviews the memo for alignment with strategy. And I want to echo what Daniela was saying, how this is critical. Does it align with Mercy Corps strategy? And then makes the recommendation to the overall board, and then fingers crossed it gets approved. And there we go.
Great. And are there specific metrics that you've found have helped in getting approval? You know, whether it relates to the framework or not, just what are you quantifying?
That's a great question. I think you and Rami covered a lot of it, and so did Daniela, but I think there's the adoption and efficiency improvements, right? And kind of marking those investments to our strategic initiative. But I think, you know, I think the adoption outputs are great, but I think it's also really important to show kind of what the outcomes would be. And so I like that, you know, I like metrics that have to do with, okay, this is the amount of hours that could be saved, or this is the amount of, I like, if we're looking at fundraising, for example, this is the amount of hours saved that could go toward applying for a grant, or this is the amount of pilots we're anticipating from this tech investment that could position us for future funding, right? So I love that. I love that point number 5, like that fundraising kind of mindset, because that, I mean, frankly, that is really compelling to the board. If you can show them that not only is this going to save us funds, but we can end up, you know, bringing in more revenue for something that's super important, that often, you know, technology sometimes gets overlooked in some of these more rigid grants. And so if we can show them that more funding is coming, you know, our way, then that's a wonderful metric.
Great. Yeah. And I think that speaks to the question that just came in on, you know, presenting a need related to internal operations. Like, if you're improving efficiency, it's opening up space and time for people to devote to more strategic initiatives that will have an external impact.
Exactly.
And then one thing we didn't touch on in the framework as much as, you know, maintaining support for the ongoing investment, since a lot of software is subscription based, and, you know, you'll have to renew the budget. So how, and then also just like the actual support and implementation and the maintenance and upkeep. So could you speak to that and how you know, maintain that support?
Yeah. So I will say that we are really fortunate at Mercy Corps, because our board, whether at the global level, or we also have a European board, is very tech oriented. Many of them have a background in tech. So many of them have been executives at places like Symantec and Google and X and Meta and Microsoft, or they have founded their own tech companies, or even founded their own nonprofits that are tech driven. So they get it. Like they understand the importance of technology and ensuring that our organization is, you know, future proof. So we're very lucky in that sense. It also means they're, you know, keen advisors and evaluators, and so they know the questions to ask and they challenge us. But when something is presented, but that's good. I think that makes it more robust. So, while keeping the board's support is super important, right? It's important to show how we're doing with our expenditures as the technology progresses. But I think also just turning internally to internal stakeholders is a really important part of maintaining support too, if that makes sense. So because you can't move forward with board approval. You can't do anything without that. But getting that buy-in from internal stakeholders is critical. So the tech leaders are, what they've done at Mercy Corps is create this kind of two-way communication with internal stakeholders about here's some updates on this rollout. Here's how it's going. What is your feedback? What do you think of the way this is being rolled out? And just creating that space for a dialogue. This is definitely not a one-way conversation. And then by building that, not only are the tech leaders kind of gathering that information to share back to the executive sponsor who will share it with the board, but they're building this trust. And in this kind of solid footing for keeping, the rollout steady, that really ultimately sets us up for success. So I think that's kind of like the secret ingredient to maintaining that support.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, just from the ground up and more
Mhm.
holistic. Awesome. And then, for organizations that might be, new to getting technology approvals, or maybe they just came into a new role and they're starting this process for the first time, or if they have boards that are that have less technology advisors type people. Is there anything else that you think is important for them to know, or any recommendations in general?
Yeah, I think I would just echo what you said earlier, just about making the case clear, especially operational efficiency gains. I mean, that's that tells a really clear narrative that can't be disputed. And like Beverly referred to, here are the implications of investing in this, and here are the implications of not investing in it. I think there's also room for education, board education, right? I think that, the nature of a board is there's a power, there's a power differential, there's a hierarchy, but that doesn't mean that there's not an opportunity for board education and building that knowledge about the landscape of technology available. And that could be something kind of outside the work stream of, making the case for a tech investment. Maybe that's something on the side, right? Like a quarterly, education opportunity for the board, something like that.
Yeah, great idea. Well, that's all the questions we have. But we would love to. So thank you, Sarah. That was a great perspective, and really good to get insight into an organization like yours. So thanks again for joining us. And Rami, I'm going to hand this over to you. I see that we're getting some questions and need to go back to some. So let's jump into those.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to touch on Beverly's question a little bit more, right? So she's asking, are there any good models or ways to quantify what happens if you don't invest in the software, right? How do you tackle the downsides of what happens if we do nothing? And so I want to just ask that to the audience. Would love to hear from you all. What specifically are you looking at when you're looking at what are the risks of doing nothing, right? What are the risks of not making this investment? Would love for you all to just share in the chat. And I think while you all are getting your answers in there, I think something that's important to look at, right, when we are looking at the risk of doing nothing is kind of considering where your organization is right now, what are you trying to achieve today, right? That you're not going to be able to achieve today by making that investment. And you're looking at that, right, at a very high level, very broad organizational goals. And then I think that the other thing is looking at those goals now long term, right? What is your organization trying to do in 5 years that this technology is actually going to help set you up for? And then additionally looking at, I think, any downstream impacts that this technology could have, right? Perhaps this is a super important technology that actually connects all the rest of your technologies together, right? And I think so showing, again, the risk of doing nothing, right? If you kind of have that before and after picture, the after picture is going to be the loss, right? Your potential loss in productivity gains or potential loss in efficiency gains could be downstream impacts, again, to donors, to the communities that you're serving, depending on other initiatives in the organization. Daniela, anything else you would add there?
Yeah, I'm gonna build on that, Remy. I think absolutely right that you want to look at your organization, where your organization is trying to be. And if your organization, for example, says, I want to be able to reach out to twice as many beneficiaries as I'm doing today. So in 5 years, I want to have twice as many. Something you do today manually might then not support that growth. So it's really looking at, okay, I have people and they do stuff manually and with spreadsheets, and they can just about manage that for the size of my organization and for the services that my organization provides today. But if I want to grow that, we're not going to be able to do that anymore. So we'd either have to hire a lot more people, which no one really likes, particularly at the moment, or we'd have to look at ways how we can automate, digitize processes and make them a lot smoother, and then be able to support that growth. So that's one of the things that came into my mind. It's also looking at things like the external, but looking at things like legislation, regulatory change, where your existing systems might just not be able to support anymore your latest tax regulation or tracking that you have to do on your supply chain and these kinds of things. So really look at all those different aspects, and I think you will find those areas that will support your investment.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Nicholas too had some good points in the chat, adding on that, right? Really, I think making sure you identify, right, why this project is so important, and not just why it's important for maybe your department or, again, looking across the organization for that. And then I did want to get to one other question. Just getting to that. So I think thinking about new technology investments, one thing that we didn't touch on in the framework at all is how can tech investments improve your climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts? Akorfa, thanks for that question. That's a really interesting question. And I would love to just redirect that to Sarah and Daniela first to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so at Mercy Corps, we see climate and technology as really inextricably linked. And I think the way I look at it is you're thinking about both like how technology affects your internal operations, and then how does it affect the programs that we are implementing on the ground. So that I see those as kind of two different things. And in terms of internal operations, it's a great question, because that's when you have to start thinking about, there's this trend toward sustainable AI, and like, okay, we're gonna start using this AI source, but what are the sustainability implications here? And that's worth thinking about. But then, turning toward our programs in general, we see, like I said, I mean, technology is really closely linked to our anticipatory action work. And so if we have a technology that, allows folks to learn about potential climate disasters that are imminent before they happen, that's a game changer, right? We've implemented some remittance technology where we can, send those funds before a disaster even strikes, and that can make or break a family's situation in rural, say, Ethiopia. So, and when I say anticipatory action, I mean these are anticipating climate-related disasters, right? So I see them as very closely tied.
Yeah, I agree. And at the end, it's about finding that balance of the benefits you can achieve while managing the risks. And certainly with AI, there's a lot of conversation, particularly with the new generative AI and large language models, about the environmental impact. I think one thing is to ask your to ask your vendors these questions, right? To be informed, to ask those questions, and to also make that part of your evaluation, if that's an area that is important to you as an organization, and then also be mindful about then how your use of these systems can be optimized in the sense of not using more than you have to achieve what you want to achieve. And the flip side of that is, yes, as you said, Sarah, there are quite amazing possibilities also with using AI as a tool in what we're all trying to achieve. And yeah, there is a balance there for sure, but I think we can find that.
Yeah, definitely. I would also, just second what you said, Daniela. As a vendor in the space, right, lean on us for the hard questions. I think from our perspective, we would love for you all to lean on us more, whether that's, again, getting just benchmarks of like how our technology has improved anything in the framework that we shared, but definitely on the ESG front as well. I think put pressure on us and ask us what we are doing to make sure that our technology, I think, helps to mitigate, climate change, or, if it doesn't necessarily mitigate it, right? Thinking about like, what are we doing as a vendor in general, to try to reduce it. I think the other thing too, right, that kind of is touched on in the chat as well, with climate change, right, is how tech can improve coordination and reach of teams that are becoming more global than ever before, right? So looking at travel emissions is always going to be an important one when considering this, as well as too, I think Sarah and Daniela, right, mentioned the climate impacts of AI, right? Maybe there's certain technologies that are actually going to help you reduce your, I think, use of maybe technologies that are very, I think, environmentally adverse, right? That don't have a great impact. So if it's going to reduce your technology on another technology that's not so green, that's something important as well. Maybe not the easiest information to get, but just something I would offer as well. And then another question coming in from Seth. So at what point do M&E considerations come into the planning and research process to be able to capture the effect and capture those stories? So who are the stakeholders, internal and external, to have those conversations with?
I'll start. At Mercy Corps, I mean, we have a whole team dedicated to MEL, to monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And so we bring them in from the get-go, like from the start when making the case to the board, because we have to identify what those metrics are, at the baseline, and then we have to report back on them further down the line once the board has approved it. So I say earlier the better. But then I think it's also a complicated question because some of the technology investments we have made have to do with MEL. So it's kind of like a meta question, right? Like not meta the company, like it is a meta issue. Like so we have like we use technologies that reduce where we can gather data using digital tools instead of, say, paper. And so we have some measurements, to measure that. But I'm saying both Meta, like for the technologies dedicated to Mel, and just as a whole, what a technology investment would do for the agency, we have to capture certain baseline metrics that we can report back on later.
And maybe to add to this, one stakeholder group we haven't looked at and I haven't talked about much is donors, and also referring to a question of Joshua here. Yes, what we see is donors more tend to invest and support frontline investment or data capture, rural data capture systems, and are maybe less interested in back office enterprise systems. We've seen a change certainly with cybersecurity, because now that is something that donors are definitely interested in, asking questions about, asking about certifications a bit more, not still where it needs to be, but a bit more. And I think for enterprise systems, again, it's about making that link of, if I can be more efficient and free up my frontline staff from administrative processes around tracking of transactions, around tracking of data capture, or trying to consolidate things, then I can support more beneficiaries, deliver more services, and that should be the argument that donor hopefully will understand as well. But there is a lot of education to be done still as well, quite frankly.
Yeah, great. Thank you both. So I think we have time for one last question. Could the urgent need for cybersecurity investments be used to justify further tech investments? I think just to touch on that one really quickly, I think definitely yes. I think a couple of recommendations, right, that we had throughout the webinar. One is think about like, why is this important now with your technology? But not just looking at what's important now, what's going to be important in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, right? So looking at that from a cybersecurity perspective. And tech investments, right? You could present, that this cybersecurity investment is just one part of a 5-part plan, right, on improving cybersecurity. And then going back to the slide that we shared from Gartner, right, that really touches on all the different cybersecurity, I think, concerns and metrics that you should be looking at. It's very specific. Once we send out the deck, you all will have a chance to look at those slides a little bit more closely, but there's some really good metrics in there to consider. Okay, so I think we're just about at time. Thank you again, NetHope, for hosting us. Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Danielle, for joining us. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us too. It's always so valuable, I think, to have the perspective of nonprofits here. We just wanted to encourage you all, again, if you want to get in touch with me or Taylor or anyone else on our team, feel free to head to okta.com/nonprofits. You can find out more about what we offer, or email us. You can email the techforgood@okta.com. It's just all spelled out, tech, FOR, good@okta.com.
Also, Remy, I just wanted to mention that we based this webinar on a white paper that we put out. And so I'm linking to that in the chat. It will also be on the webinar landing page. So have a read if you want to dive into this further. Thanks again.
Wonderful.
Thanks,
Thank you all so much for this incredible webinar. It's such a huge benefit to the NetHope community. So thank you again to our engaged audience as well. Thank you so much for your questions, your comments, and your thoughtfulness. This webinar series, I want to remind you, it needs your voice. You can help us improve this vital resource for the broader NetHope community by filling out our satisfaction survey. And that's going to pop up in a new tab in your browser when the Zoom webinar closes. And a follow-up email is coming your way in the next few hours with links to the webinar recording, as mentioned, the slides and other resources shared during today's presentation and discussion. And on behalf of our presenters and NetHope, we wish you a great rest of your day wherever you are in our wide world. Take good care. Thanks so much.